If you're looking for the best Canon lenses, here's the list you must see. We made this list based on our personal preference and sorted it based on their features, prices, quality, durability, and reputation of the manufacturers and customer feedback. Also, we have included options for every type of customer. So let's get started. At the 10th position of our list, we have Canon EF 35mm f1.4L2 USM lens. One of the most popular lenses in a professional portrait photographer's bag is a 35mm prime. A good 35mm will render a sharp subject while slightly distorting the space around the subject in a way that many fashion and portrait photographers find appealing. Canon recently announced an update to their wildly popular 35mm f1.4L with the Canon EF 35mm f1.4L2 USM. It takes everything professionals have come to rely on with the first version and made it even more sharp with the benefit of weather sealing. Where the first version was sharp, the 2 redesign is now the sharpest 35mm lens on the market, bar none. For a not-so-modest $300 premium, Canon has turned one of its most popular professional lenses into an absolute MTF, a chart that plots sharpness across a range champion. Canon has achieved this record by incorporating a new optical element formula that includes their new blue spectrum refractive optics. This is a fancy new organic element material that features more efficient light refracting characteristics, and the end result is a significantly sharp image than what was previously possible. If you want the creme de la creme 35mm lens, there is nothing currently on the market that can match the Canon EF 35mm f1.4L2 USM, but be prepared to pay for the privilege of using it. Moving on to the next at number 9 with Canon Telephoto EF 135mm f/2.0L USM autofocus lens. One of Canon's holy trinity of lenses, the EF 135mm f2L USM is a staple in many portrait, fashion, indoor sports, and street photographers' bags. The 135mm f2L is able to shrink down the depth of field thanks to its relatively large f2 maximum aperture. Since it's a longer telephoto lens, this allows the lens to compress the subject's surroundings, creating a very pleasing look that both highlights the subject and melts away distracting elements elsewhere in the frame. Since this lens is a prime, you have the benefit of a large aperture that does not also require the lens to be uncomfortably large. Were there a telephoto zoom capable of 135mm and an f2 aperture, it would be completely unwieldy to hold and carry around, most likely weighing many pounds. But a 135mm prime is able to have a large f2 aperture yet still be no larger than a traditional walk-around lens. With the 135mm f2L USM, you get the advantage of a 135mm reach and a shallow depth of field normally reserved for much wider lenses, all the while being in a small enough package that it doesn't break your back to use. There's little wonder why so many professionals continue to use the 135mm f2L USM almost 20 years after it was released. The Canon EF 135mm f2L USM is a relatively older lens, having been introduced way back in 1996, so it's probably on the short list to be refreshed by Canon. Nevertheless, it focuses very fast and accurately, a must for sports photographers who shoot in low light, and is extremely sharp across the frame even by today's standards. If you're looking for a portrait or low light telephoto prime, the Canon EF 135mm f2L USM can't be beat for sharpness, aperture size, and focusing accuracy. The number 8 position is held by Canon EF 100-400mm f4.5 to 5.6L IS USM telephoto zoom lens for Canon SLR cameras. Yet another recent replacement in this roundup, the Canon EF 100-400mm f/4.5 to 5.6L IS2 replaces the popular 100-400mm f/4.5 to 5.6L IS. Though the latter was rather long in the tooth, it was still commonly seen attached to the cameras of professional wildlife and sports photographers, even to this day in fact. However, the new EF 100-400mm f4.5 to 5.6L IS2 is a proper upgrade in every respect. Though it has a lot to live up to, The Canon EF 100-400mm f/4.5 to 5.6 LIS2 continued the tradition of recent Canon replacement lenses, raising the bar for their market segment. There's one twist with this replacement, and fortunately, it works to the benefit of the consumer. It's priced at or below the lens it replaces, and to my knowledge, that's a first for a Canon lens. Another first is that the hood of this lens has an integrated finger window which allows you to adjust and attach polarizer without taking the hood off. While this is common with lenses from other manufacturers, this is something new for Canon. For those of us who've struggled with adjusting polarizers on hooded Canon lenses, this little detail is greatly appreciated. To the more important metrics, the Canon EF 100-400mm f/4.5 to 5.6 LIS2 is extremely sharp across its range, and its autofocus is cheetah quick and reliable. This comes as no surprise if you've been following Canon's recent replacements. This one is no different from the other twos in that regard. This lens leads its class. If you are looking for a zoom lens that covers the telephoto range out to 400mm, this lens should top your list. It's built like a tank, weather sealed against the elements, priced right, and should last you for years to come. Next at number 7, we have Canon 17-55mm EF-S IS USM lens. The Canon EF-S 17-55mm f/2.8 IS is one of the first EF-S lenses Canon released, and its performance suggests Canon is very serious about supporting the EF-S mount with professional level lenses. Though not a proper member of Canon's professional L lens line, the EF-S 17-55mm f/2.8 IS is nevertheless considered by many to be Canon's only EF-S L lens, if just de facto. The Canon EF-S 17-55mm f/2.8 IS has a large 77mm front thread to filters, and that's just one clue that this lens means business. Typically, Canon's professional lenses have large front threads because the front element on high-performing lenses tend to be large. So it's the nature of the beast to require large filters. One criticism of this lens, and one used to show how the EF-S 70-55mm f/2.8 IS wasn't professional grade, was that the lens body is a rigid plastic polycarbonate. Not only is polycarb a perfectly capable material, many of Canon's L lenses are now also made of polycarbonate. This lens is made with both ultra-low dispersion and aspherical optical elements, so rest assured, the features that most directly contribute to image quality are there. In addition, the Canon EF-S 17-55mm f/2.8 IS has built-in image stabilization, a rare but very useful feature among fast f/2.8 walk-around lenses. Though there's much controversy as to the value of UV protectors on modern lenses, there exist many anecdotal stories of the Canon EF-S 17-55mm f/2.8 IS benefiting from a UV filter being mounted. There may be enough evidence to suggest a UV filter prevents or inhibits dust from entering the body. Actually, if you look closely at the front of this lens, there appears to be a small hole right out of the front element in the bezel that may be the culprit. Blocking this hole, which may be for pressure release as the body extends and contracts for zooming, might help stop dust from entering the body, possibly requiring cleaning. So no matter which side of the UV protector debate you fall on, you might want to consider one where this lens is concerned. If you shoot on a Canon crop camera like the Rebel XSI or the 70D, among many others, consider the ultra-sharp, fast aperture, and quick autofocusing Canon EF-S 17-55mm f/2.8 IS. It might be as close to an L lens we'll get on an EF-S mount lens. The number 6 position is held by Canon 24-70mm EF f/2.8 L USM lens. Replacing the venerable EF 24-70mm f/2.8 L lens a few years ago, the new EF 24-70mm f/2.8 L2 lens bests the original in every respect that matters for image quality. The price is significant, but this big is also going to be the lens you probably keep mounted on your camera the most. It covers an essential range for a walk-around lens and should meet most needs for convenience and performance from wide to telephoto. Walk-around lenses are generally defined as a do-it-all lens that lets you capture wide shots as well as short telephoto. The Canon EF 24-70mm f/2.8L2 will not only do that, but accomplish this better than any other similarly spec'd lens, sometimes by a large margin. For the longest time, the sharpest lens for Canon cameras was the TSE 24mm f/3.5L2 tilt shift lens by Canon with edge-to-edge sharpness that was legendary. However, it's not fast, which is to say its aperture does not let in enough light to categorize it as fast, since fast lenses are considered to be f/2.8 or larger. And the TSE 24mm does not autofocus, nor does it zoom. Instead, being a purpose-built prime lens designed for a limited use, namely perspective correction. The Canon EF 24-70mm f/2.8L2, on the other hand, is even sharper at 24mm. It is the new Canon sharpness king because not only is it sharper at 24mm, but it zooms out to 70mm, autofocuses, and performs at a fast f/2.8. Utilizing Super UD and aspherical elements in the new optical formula, the 24-70mm f/2.8L2 is razor sharp across its entire range. There is currently no zoom lens sharper across its range. As a walk-around lens, this lens is the champion. As a supremely performing professional lens for more specific needs, this lens is without equal for those seeking a 1-2 punch of convenience and performance. As with most professional level lenses, the 24-70mm f/2.8L2 uses 9 round aperture blades to achieve that gorgeous bokeh effect where out-of-focus objects melt away into a smooth, pleasing blur so prized by professionals and amateurs alike. Granted, it's a touch on the heavy side since fast zoom lenses require large optical elements which weigh a considerable amount, but that's really the only knock against the lens. In fact, the front element and many of the internal elements are so weighty, Canon included a zoom lock switch to prevent the lens from physically extending as it resets facing down by your side when not in use or when being transported. Okay, there might be one more shortcoming, and it's the price. No fast, professional zoom is cheap, but even by those standards, the 24-70mm f/2.8L2 commands a premium cost. It doesn't have image stabilization, which would help explain its price tag, but would also increase the lens's weight and bulk were it included. All said, it's also worth every penny. Few lenses master as many important criteria for a lens as well as the EF 24-70mm f/2.8L2 USM lens does. If you consider that this lens will likely outlast your next 3 or 4 cameras, it's an investment that will eventually pay for itself. The number 5 position is dominated by Canon EF 70-200mm f/2.8L IS USM telephoto zoom lens. The EF 20-200mm f/2.8L IS2 is considered by many to be Canon's most important lens. Not only does it cover the important short telephoto range, but it does so with exceptional performance across its entire range. The EF 20-200mm f/2.8L IS2 replaces the original EF 70-200mm f/2.8L IS, which itself was a very popular lens. Despite the original's almost universal favor, the newer EF 20-200mm f/2.8L IS2 improves on its predecessor in every aspect. The EF 20-200mm f/2.8L IS2 is one of Canon's sharpest lenses. Wide open at 70mm, few lenses can match its edge-to-edge image performance. At this end, it picks up where the EF 24-70mm f/2.8L2 leaves off, with the EF 20-200 f/2.8L IS2 delivering similarly impressive results all the way up to its 200mm max. The sharpness across its range is so impressive that many professional portrait photographers rely on it almost exclusively, something unheard of for a zoom lens 10 years ago. This lens delivers the classic Canon bokeh when the aperture is set wide open, and coupled with the natural compression effect of a telephoto focal length, the EF 20-200mm f/2.8L IS2 renders absolutely gorgeous portraits. In this regard, many professional portrait photographers like to claim that the EF 20-200mm f/2.8L IS2 prints money, which is to say the quality of images this lens produces can be visually stunning, wowing clients and leading to increased business. Of course, you still need to know how to wield such a fantastic instrument, but when mastered, the EF 20-200mm f/2.8L IS2 will yield amazing results. As a member of Canon's L line, you can expect the components that make up this lens to be top-notch, and rest assured, they are. Making use of large and expensive fluoride and ultra-low dispersion elements, this lens performs on the test bench as you would expect, with well-controlled chromatic aberration and nearly imperceptible distortion. Compared to most other zooms, the EF 20-200mm f/2.8L IS2 performs exceptionally well wide open at f/2.8. Performing this well when wide open is the telltale for how quality a zoom lens is, and this pick cannot and will not disappoint. If your bank account can swing it, the Canon EF 20-200mm f/2.8L IS2 is a must-have lens and will be a reliable go-to for years to come, whether you're a professional or you aspire to produce images at an artisan level. Moving on to the next at number 4 with Canon EF S 55-250mm f4 to 5.6 IS STM lens for Canon SLR cameras. Canon's latest budget telephoto zoom lens uses a new CPU and AF algorithm for improved speed over the old model. The STM designation in the lens name is for stepping motor, which is just a fancy way of saying the lens is optimized for use in video without sacrificing any quality when shooting stills. The lens offers continuous, quiet autofocus while shooting video, which is excellent since Canon DSLRs are known for being able to shoot sharp videos as well as stills. This lens is for more than just video, however. It includes optical image stabilization, a nice feature at this price point. The front of the lens also doesn't rotate, so polarizing filters stay put. Special lens coatings are used to cut black on flare while reproducing colors accurately. This lens is also compact for its focal range, weighing in at less than a pound. A more expensive lens would get you a faster maximum aperture, but for the price, the features on this lens are excellent. The number 3 position is held by Sigma 340101 35mm f1.4 DG HSM lens for Canon. When Sigma restructured their lens lineup in 2014 and introduced their top-of-the-line art lenses, the first such art lens was the 35mm f1.4 DG HSM art, and no one could have asked for a better first impression. For a relative song, photographers now had access to a high-quality autofocus lens that exceeded what was available from first-party companies for sharpness and image quality. The art line was a revelation, and to this day, Sigma considers the 35mm f1.4 DG HSM art to be their flagship lens. Also introduced with this lens was Sigma's new system for allowing users to calibrate their lenses from a home computer with a proprietary USB dock. The USB dock utilizes software to analyze the lens's performance and fine-tune focusing response to produce more accurate, sharper images when autofocusing. In the past, Sigma users complained of focusing performance that tended to drift over time, requiring them to send in the lenses to Sigma to get calibrated. Now, an owner can quickly and easily diagnose a focusing issue should an issue ever arise and get back to shooting in mere minutes after calibrating from the convenience of their PC or Mac. You can even update the firmware if an update is needed. This is a system unique to Sigma and a godsend to working professionals who can't afford to be without their lenses while they're in the shop. Until the Canon EF 35mm f1.4 L2 USM ships, the Sigma 35mm art lens rules the sharpest roost. And even after the Canon ships, there will be no better value for top quality performance for 35mm lenses than the Sigma 35mm f1.4 DG HSM art. Next at number 2 we have Sigma 210101 18-35mm f1.8 DC HSM lens for Canon APS-C DSLRs. This is an APS-C zoom lens with a constant f/1.8 aperture, making it the fastest zoom lens available for Canon cameras. It looks like a typo, doesn't it? Well, it's not, and this surely isn't your daddy's Sigma. As a member of Sigma's art lineup, this lens performs as we've come to expect from art lenses. Throughout its admittedly short range, the images this lens produces are pristine with sharpness across the frame from end to end. But hold your breath, that's still not its greatest feature. In a first for the industry, this lens has a constant maximum aperture of a whopping f/1.8, making it extremely fast at all focal lengths. APS-C sensors are smaller than the conventional 35mm full-frame sensors, but they often have higher pixel densities. More importantly, smaller sensors have larger depth of focus than their full-frame counterparts at a given aperture and focal length. This lens has a rather dramatically large aperture, which counters the thinner depth of focus phenomenon somewhat. The science of why isn't important for this review. Just know that the professional effect of a razor-sharp subject sitting in a thin depth of focus set in a smooth, blurry background is better achieved on a camera with a small sensor by using lenses with extremely large maximum apertures. The Sigma 18-35mm f/1.8 DC HSM art is such a lens, and it's a zoom. Since this lens is designed for Canon's crop sensors, you need to convert the focal length of the lens to get a better idea of the field of view the lens offers. For instance, at 35mm, this lens will give you an equivalent field of view of a 56mm lens on a full-frame camera. So you should consider this a wide-angle to standard lens zoom since it offers no telephoto focal length. That might be a concern for some looking for a more complete walk-around lens with the option to go longer without having to swap lenses. Made with 4 spherical elements and 5 special low dispersion glass elements, the Sigma 18-35mm f/1.8 DC HSM art packs quite a punch where glass technology is concerned. The lens is also user adjustable with Sigma's USB calibration dock to assure this lens will be sharp for many years of use. Compared to other professional quality zoom lenses, this lens is priced very competitively. If you're looking for a walk-around lens that allows you razor-thin depth of focus on your Rebel 60D, 70D, or any Canon crop camera, you would be wise to consider the Sigma 18-35mm f/1.8 DC HSM art zoom lens. Finally, the number 1 position is dominated by Sigma 50mm f/1.4 DG HSM art lens for Canon cameras. Sigma has been making third-party lenses for all the major camera manufacturers for decades, with mixed results. To wit, historically speaking, if you could not afford a first-party offering, Sigma tended to be a perfectly workable compromise. That has all changed now. Starting around the release of the 50mm f/1.4 EX DG HSM lens, and roughly during the transition from Sigma's unique crinkle finish lens finish to the smoother rubberized coating, Sigma really upped their game. The lens was sharper than the Canon or Nikon equivalent, if slightly more expensive, and a very robust build. Canon and Nikon's 50mm f/1.4 at this point were and still are in need of a refresh. This allows Sigma to swoop in and claim a much larger share of the 50mm f/1.4 market than before. The result is the lens sold like hotcakes. With the photography community now primed to accept Sigma as a viable critical situation option for professionals, they released the much heralded Art line. The Art lenses are professional-level, well-built lenses that feature all of Sigma's most valuable technologies. Hypersonic motor autofocus, multiple aspherical and low dispersion elements, super multi-layer coatings, large front elements to nearly eradicate chromatic aberration, and Sigma's new USB dock for fine-tuning the lens focus. Suffice it to say, the Art lenses are every bit as top of the line as you'd expect from Canon and Nikon's pro-level lenses. The Sigma 50mm f/1.4 DG HSM art is a refresh of earlier popular EX lenses done with all the accoutrements of the Art line. Where the EX was sharp, this Art version is sharp. It is retina slicing sharp. The all-time sharpness leader of 50mm lenses is the Zeiss 55mm Otus, and the Sigma 50mm f/1.4 DG HSM art offers 99% of the Otus's performance at less than a quarter of the price, and the Otus doesn't even have autofocus. If you want a prime that delivers unmatched image quality In an autofocus body, the Sigma 50mm f1.4 DG HSM has no peer and is considered the standard for sharpness among all Canon, Nikon, and Sony lenses. That's all for today. We upload product review videos every single day. So don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button for the upcoming video notification.